Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Next Frontiers of AI podcast, where we speak with the pioneers who are not only shaping the future of AI, but helping bring the value of AI to life. I'm Scott Hebner, Principal Analyst for AI at SiliconANGLE Media and theCUBE Research, and thanks so much for joining us. We're entering a new era of intelligent agents that can reason, act, and collaborate across business workflows. But there are limitations to what agents can do when built solely on LLMs, which compromises their ability to be trusted in real-world business environments. In past episodes, we've talked about how data is not knowledge, how predictions are not judgments, and how reasoning requires causality. But there's yet another major limitation holding agents back from becoming effective and trustworthy digital coworkers. While LLMs may be fluent in language, they can't grasp how humans think, feel, rationalize, or act. Simply said, they understand language, but not people. That's a very big difference. They are missing the psychological context that shape how people communicate, establish goals, make plans, evaluate situations, make decisions, and so on and so forth. In a world where agents must engage and collaborate, not just respond, this illusion of understanding becomes a critical risk factor, especially in high-stake business and domains and environments. So what if we can change all that? What if AI could infer cognitive state, emotional tone, and a mindset from everyday language and use it to become more psychologically intelligent collaborators with human beings? That is, making them human aware. Today's guest is an innovator in this exciting new field of AI. And I'm excited to welcome Jonathan Kreindler, the president and co-founder of Receptiviti. They have spent the last decade advancing the science of language-based psychological insight. Jonathan and his team are now pioneering a new layer of AI, one that allows agents to understand who they are interacting with, not just what was said. Jonathan, welcome to the podcast. It is great that you have taken the time to join us. I'm really excited about this conversation because as I talk to more and more of you pioneers out there, I'm finding new angles and new things that are really shaping the future. And this one makes a ton of sense to me. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with just a little bit of background for our audience. Can you just tell us a little bit about your personal journey and what led you to where you are now leading Receptiviti?
Sure. I after doing an undergrad degree in psychology and a master's degree in business, I had about a 15-year run as a management consultant, working for large firms and smaller boutique firms. And in around 2009, I started my own practice, my own firm, and we were doing work with everybody from government entities to Fortune 100s to startups. And one of my clients was SAP for years. No NDA there. And around 2013, I was doing work with one of the folks who was responsible for awareness marketing. And he was explaining to me that, they were struggling to understand, or struggling to really, build messaging that resonated with their target audience. And this was a gentleman who was responsible for awareness marketing at SAP. And he was expressing that they were, that part of that struggle was, they invested heavily in, an agency to help them refine these personas and really, finesse the messaging in a way that would resonate with the audience. And he asked me if I might be able to help with that, if my team could help. And we thought we could probably figure something out. And I started where, so many of us do when we're trying to solve a problem that we haven't encountered directly before, started digging into the research. And I happened to stumble upon some really interesting work that was not necessarily done to solve that problem, but I very quickly realized could be adapted to solve the problem that client was facing. And it was the work of a gentleman named James Pennebaker, Professor James W. Pennebaker at the University of Texas at Austin. And make a long story short, Jamie, as we call him, he became one of the co-founders of Receptiviti. The two of us started it back in 2015. What Jamie discovered was that language provides a tremendous amount of signal into the way that people feel, into their psychological state, into their cognitive processes. And while that might seem somewhat obvious, what isn't obvious is that traditional natural language processing techniques, like those used by just about everybody, including large language models, don't pick up on those signals because they ignore a lot of the language that carries most of that signal. We can get into that in a bit, but basically Jamie, through his research, made this discovery and started building this body of research and science that delved into the way that people use these stock words, these words that are removed by traditional NLP, and all of the signal that comes out of it. His body of research is immense. There's now 30,000 citations on Google Scholar of his science, and we decided, once we realized we could fix the problem or help this client solve their marketing problem, we started realizing there were more and more applications for this sort of science. So we took, we established Receptiviti as the commercial side to what Jamie had been doing as an academic, and began this really interesting journey of a great deal of consulting work in the early days, and that evolved into some more kind of solution kind of focused applications that we built. But as we fast forward to today, in 2021, we launched an API. It really forms the foundation of our business, and our customers are companies that really want to better understand the psychology of people that matter to their business. And so they'll wire their technology into our API, they'll run language through it from those that they want to better understand, and the system generates about 200 different signals of psychology, cognitive processes, and other factors that kind of sit below the surface, beyond the obvious of what people are talking about. This really gets into who they are, where they're at that point in time from a psychological perspective.
So as we've sort of now entered into this era of AI, what are you seeing in the enterprise, your customer set, and as you're gauging out there with companies, and particularly those that are, I think most of them are starting to transition to, it's not just about applying AI, but it's got to be trustworthy AI, as they expect it to do more and more than just, be a tool for analyzing information or generating, documents or whatever. And, you've been talking a lot out there about the illusion of understanding.
Yeah.
Can you just explain that a little bit and how that's related to what people are using today with the LLMs?
Yeah. And it's a really good question. So, so much focus on large language models and their capabilities, and how they're being integrated, or these bots and call center systems are now leveraging large language models to act on behalf of organizations, right? To be that voice, to be that interface, and they're trained on huge data sets, and we've seen it over the past couple of years now since this, the public launch of large language models. We've seen how good they have become at communicating with us. You can get onto ChatGPT, you can spend a whole day chatting with ChatGPT about anything you want. Right. And if you put somebody in front of ChatGPT who had no familiarity with what they were doing, with what they were interacting with, they would probably think there was another person sitting at the other end who was just really, really fast at doing everything they did. So we've gotten to a point where we've got these, large language models and these systems that sound human. They almost feel human. They don't quite feel human, but they get pretty darn close. And they're really, really good at syntax and semantics, and they put everything in front of us, and it looks like coherent language, and it is coherent language. Mm-hmm. But it's about this deep at the end of the day, right? There's not a lot below the surface there. And I don't mean, if you ask the large language model a follow-on question, it's not going to be able to answer it. It is. It doesn't really know much more than what it is reading, the surface level of the data it's trained on and what it's presenting to you. And so when you're interacting with a large language model, you can ask it a question. It'll give you a fact-based response, but it can't really tell anything about you based on what you're asking, beyond the fact that you don't know what it is you're asking about. Right? It can't make inferences about, your confidence level or how analytical you are or other factors that could go a long way at informing the way it responds back to you with a more tailored response based on who you are. So if I were a very highly analytical person and I asked a large language model a question, it might not respond to me in that highly analytical way that would really jive with who I am and actually, do a better job of presenting me information with the way that I would, best receive it, or I would want to receive it. And so what we're seeing today are these, large language models that are being used as the backbone of these, these agentic systems and these bot-based interfaces and call centers and whatnot that are superficially intelligent, but not psychologically deep or intelligent. And so what's interesting is they're interacting with people, routinely. This is what they do. But as much as they understand the subject matter of what they're presenting, maybe not understand isn't the right word, but they can regurgitate the subject matter that they're presenting. They really know very, very little about the people they're interacting with. And, as these are systems that, these large language models and these AI systems are really, technology systems built by humans for humans, where there's a bit of a disconnect here between, the audience they're intended to serve and what they actually, the depth of the psychological depth and understanding that they need to really interact with people, in the best way possible. I mean, you and I are talking right now. Right now, I'm doing most of the talking, but in conversations we've had offline, we pick up on, there's social cues we pick up on and nuances in the way that we communicate.
Right.
I read you, you read me. We understand. You see a look on my face. You can tell that I'm not quite understanding what you're saying, or vice versa. These are things that are completely missed by technology and when we interact with technology. And a lot of those signals are actually conveyed in the text itself. So when these systems are, interpreting the text at the surface level, they miss these social psychological cues and a lot of that subtext. And so what our science has done is it's kind of bringing the psychological subtext above the surface now, so that these large language models can begin to understand, okay, the person is talking about XYZ and they're talking about it with a great deal of confidence, or they're talking about it with a lot of cognitive load. Maybe they don't quite understand what they're talking about as much. And so it really rounds out the understanding of these large language models so they can be a lot more, they can communicate with a lot more acuity in a way that is much more, it jives better with the audience at the end of the day. I mean, that's just one aspect of it.
Yeah, and I would imagine that becomes increasingly important. It's one thing where generative AI has been used as a tool for people. Yeah. As it starts to move into being a true partner that's supposed to be like in the work world, they're being paired up with human beings to get work done, and they got to establish goals and plan something and make decisions together, and they're there to support. I would imagine it's one thing to get information and ask questions, and like you said, when we talk, get responses. It's another whole thing if you're trying to establish a goal. I would imagine the psychological thing becomes even more important. And actually, let me show you a survey that I actually found out there, because when we talked, it really intrigued me, this whole area. So I went out and I did some research. There's actually a lot out there. There's some stuff out there from McKinsey. I saw some from the Boston Consulting Group. This one happens to be from MIT, and it's not that old. I just think a couple months ago, they published the study that they did. And you can see here, 78% of business professionals agreed that the psychological and emotional understanding is really critical for AI to successfully work with humans.
Yeah.
And there was also a data point in there that said that 62% of business executives would feel a lot more comfortable, accelerating the deployment of digital workers or digital labor if they knew that the agents were able to work, more effectively with their human counterparts, which comes to this in many ways, right? And yeah. I found it, basically my takeaway from reading everything was this is a need in businesses, and it's 78% is a pretty big percentage, right? So it's not some foreign cool idea. This is like real stuff that people are thinking.
Yeah. Look, I think, we're depending more and more on these systems at the end of the day. And sometimes we don't even know that we're depending on them at the end of the day. I was dealing with some travel challenges a couple of weeks ago, and, put a call into, I think it was Expedia, right? And you end up with, this bot who's answering your questions. And I've got a bias here, because the second that I start interacting with the bot, I'm testing it a little bit and trying to understand how much of me does it really understand, and it knows what I'm saying, but can it get me? And I think this is where we're going to start seeing really, really big changes over the next few years, where not bots necessarily that it's not about fooling humans into believing the bots are real, because that's probably something we shouldn't be doing. Like I want to know I'm chatting with a bot. But if the bot can really understand me, right, or can really, if it can really understand me, it can do a better job of helping me. But the other side of it too is the empathy part of it too, right? If the bot is completely flat and I'm getting more and more agitated or frustrated because this process is taking a really long time to resolve whatever my inquiry or my problem is, it would be really, really nice to if the bot could actually, acknowledge that, recognize it. It doesn't even need to say anything to me, but if it could change its course a little bit, recognizing that my tone is changing, it provides a feeling of a little bit more understanding. And it sounds like a really strange thing to say when you're interacting with something that isn't real, but humans are really real that way. We look for, feedback in places sometimes that we shouldn't. And, we want systems to treat us as humans, even though when they're not, right? So
yeah, I mean, I could imagine, like, if you're working, you have a goal with an agent, and you're trying to make some decisions on the best way to achieve that goal, and if you're like not really feeling good about the recommendation and you're hesitant or stressed about it, it would be really cool if it recognized that some way and then says, hey, want me to give you some more proof points, or you want, whatever, right? So I get this. And, one of the things I've definitely, in the research that we've been doing at the Cube Research, is the overriding success factor for a generative AI is going to be the trust factor.
Yeah.
Not in the sense necessarily of security and compliance and data privacy and all that, but in the sense that if human beings don't trust their digital coworker, they're not going to use it. They're not going to rely on it. It's not going to become a true partner.
Yeah.
And I think this goes a long way as it matures to hoping people trust what they're doing with the agent, right?
Yeah, I saw some research recently, and I'm not going to be able to quote the numbers or the source, unfortunately, but it was speaking about how there's the desire for AI systems that truly understand us at the end of the day, and people's willingness to interact with these systems that much more when they feel like the system actually gets who they are, or and speaks to them as a person, as opposed to just being kind of the rote same thing person to person. So yeah, I think as humans we want that. I think from a business perspective, we're seeing this proliferation of AI bots now being used, across industries. This is where, there's so many companies now that are being funded. These are kind of front ends to back ends, which are powered by the LLM companies that we're all aware of. But, those systems are limited in many ways, in a lot of the ways that we just discussed. And, the different, like all of these companies are going to need differentiators at the end of the day. And at the early stages, that that intuitive system that really understands humans will be a huge differentiator. But I don't think we're very long from a point where it's table stakes, where systems just need to be able to understand us at that level. And I think we're talking about systems that are, and what I've been talking about in this conversation has been more customer support sort of systems, but think about when we get to, digital health, mental health sort of support. And, you've got systems that right now, they're not that intelligent from a psychological perspective. Again, some of them, early days, they were scripted. Now they're less scripted because of large language models and the generative component, but they still don't have that depth of psychological understanding. We're not too far away from a point where we've got large language model based generative AI that is, or I shouldn't say, sorry, generative based psychological support systems that can really start picking up on some of the signals of various diagnoses and understand that, people who are showing signs of depression use language this way much more so than people who aren't. I think at the end of the day, there's no question that there's a huge gap to be filled here. We're never going to get to a point where these systems are as, there's all this talk about artificial general intelligence. We're probably, a decade plus away from that at the end of the day for a whole bunch of different reasons. I mean, what is intelligence, and what does intelligence mean to me versus a different culture? They're very different definitions. But if we're going to get anywhere near artificial general intelligence, we're going to need that kind of social, psychological aspect, that kind of fluency in understanding people that these systems simply don't have today.
Yeah. I mean, again, my view of this, the very practical view of it, is that, again, you know, the ability to innovate. I mean, think of it this way: the currency of innovation is becoming trust, particularly in AI. No trust is no ROI. And when you're dealing with human beings on the other that are interacting with AI, the more you can get those human beings to trust what they're interacting with, and this makes it, again, a ton of sense on something that can help really create that trust. You know, if you're someone that's, I can just imagine, maybe it jokes with you a little bit if it senses that you're trying to get something done, but if you're really stressed out and seem you don't do that, and all those different kind of things, I agree with you. Whether you're calling a customer support as a customer or whether you're an employee doing work with an agent, just makes a ton of sense.
I think there's one other piece though, which is this sycophancy piece, right? Which is, it's tied to trust. Like, how do you know when these systems are not necessarily, like, how do you ensure these systems don't direct people down a path that they shouldn't direct them down, or be overly positive in its responses to what a person is saying, even when it shouldn't be being positive. When you can layer in more psychological understanding, you can start understanding when the system is being overly positive towards something that it probably shouldn't be being overly positive. Like, it's not you can stop it from encouraging negative sorts of behavior at the end of the day, right? You can start understanding when, for example, there's a when the rapport is just kind of gone on too long at the end of the day, when there are other signals there that should be suggesting that the large language model in this situation back off a little bit and stop encouraging, a certain behavior.
Yeah, we can probably go on all day with just as we think about this. I mean, even the person is interacting, what's their risk tolerance on a recommendation? Or are they more conservative and they want a lot of proof? And maybe the models, will want to make sure it's very high confidence level things that are being provided, where maybe for someone else, you can just the use cases can go on forever here.
Absolutely.
So let's just talk about the LLMs for a minute, because again, I've been on this mantra about LLMs alone. To me, they're the gateway into the world of AI. They're democratizing it for everybody around the world, but they're the equivalent of the browsers during the internet age, right? It's how you build around that.
Yeah.
That's really going to make a difference by extending, extended models that then interact with the LLMs and through a generative AI interface. So you have argued that that you need more than just fluency, in the language, right? It's not the same thing as understanding, and that AI systems will fail to truly engage with humans, and that's why this psychological context is missing. So talk to me about what you see as missing in the LLMs and why they can't do that.
Yeah, these large language model systems. I mean, I'm not saying anything here that you don't already know. These large language model systems have been developed to predict the next word at the end of the day, and they do that remarkably well. So much so that you could be fooled into thinking that you're talking to a human in a lot of cases. But being trained to predict the next word and create these kind of and have fluency in that way is a very, very different thing than being able to understand the meaning of words or understand the implications of certain words being used or rates and frequencies and repetition of words and whatnot. And so really dealing with kind of two different things. On one side is the generative. So how do how have these models been built to generate language based on the language they've been trained on, but flipping it around and saying, can these models actually infer what's happening beneath the surface based on the language that is being used by the person that they're interacting with? Is just something they weren't developed to do in the first place. And so what they're pretty good at is understanding these kind of overt signals, right? If somebody is expressing language that is typically involved with stress, like, I can't believe this has happened, or I don't have time to get this done, or there's so much going on, it'll pick up on that because, quite logically, those are, stress related sorts of utterances and phrases, right? But what they don't know how to do is they don't have this ability to start understanding. They don't have the ability to understand at a very, very deep level how people communicate differently when they're stressed out and not showing that stress or not communicating that stress. Or, if somebody is depressed, if somebody is not saying, I feel depressed, or if somebody is not saying, I'm really not happy today, right? The models will understand that.
Or yeah, I mean, just yeah, because everyone
They'll
has
get
this.
that, right? But if I'm a person who is, showing signs of depression, and I'm not being too overt, but I'm using more first-person singular pronouns and more absolutist language, the large language model probably won't get that. But a system like ours will pick up on that as, some of the very, very, significant indicators that are associated with people who are showing signs of depression. And so what you've got these great systems that are incredibly, good at mimicking and sounding like humans without the depth of, they don't understand, right? They're looking for correlations, they're looking for relationships, but they don't necessarily know how to read us as humans. And another part of it too is, when doing, when analyzing language, they're not looking at prepositions and they're not looking at pronouns and function words as anything other than just words, right?
Right.
What we know is prepositions, pronouns, these function words, what are sometimes called stop words, hold the lion's share of psychological signal in language. And traditional NLP completely ignores them, because the words that we're interested in, he, she, they, words like because, although, they have no context. And so traditional NLP will look at it and say, don't need it. No context. It doesn't matter when it comes to topic and high level sentiment analysis. But, these words are incredibly, incredibly important when you're trying to understand human psychology. They're the social words at the end of the day, the psychological words, the words that help us understand where people are and how they relate to other people.
Yeah, because you are right. The LLMs, they provide a really critical foundation, and they're basically statistical probability engines that crank through. They swim in these huge data lakes, lakes of data, and they establish patterns and correlations. Like you said, next best token that then forms a word, and so on and so forth. But I love this, the chart that we had talked about and you had provided here, which I kind of really, I think, nets it out, right? I mean, they treat everyone the same, right? Except, maybe you can talk through these four things.
Yeah, absolutely. If you and I were to speak to an LLM or engage with an LLM and ask a very, the same question, we might use slightly different words to ask the question, but the question would be the same. And the LLM would largely treat us the same way, right? A smarter system, a more psychologically aware system, would look at how we are asking that question and recognize the difference in how reflects where each of us is coming from, somewhere slightly different, and address us or respond to us in a slightly different way based on where we're coming from, even though the question is the same. So yeah, they absolutely do treat users the same. More informed systems would not do that at the end of the day. In an ideal world, they're going to personalize the experience. Right now, they're responding with language that is relevant to the task at hand, but they're not necessarily personalizing the experience or changing the way they say things based on who we are and how we communicate, and really, what our kind of communication style and psychological state is. They understand a lot about people, facts at the end of the day, but they don't really understand more than superficial emotions and the way that people think. Like, with the right sort of analysis, you can tell that somebody is a highly analytical thinker, or is much lower on the analytical scale. A large language model is pretty much blind to that. It's going to respond the way it responds, right? If I'm a highly analytical individual, I'm going to appreciate facts and data and points of comparison. But again, LLMs don't have that capacity yet. And ultimately, as the slide shows, they really do. They lack that human psychological context. And context is this word that is being, used more and more and more now. How do I provide more context to the LLM to get a better response? I think I've seen 10 different articles just the past 2 days about context and prompts and context and LLMs. And, one of the big pieces that's missing at the end of the day, especially in systems that were built by humans to interact with and support humans, is the human context at the end of the day. That's psychological context. So I think, we're getting there, but, we're we're a long way, current state, long way away from having these, these psychologically intelligent models.
And the more you address those things you put up there, the more trust I think people are going to have in interacting with them, which I think is really important. So let's talk a little bit about how you kind of go about making this happen, right?
Yeah.
Receptivity and just in general. And again, let me bring up another graphic here for you to kind of explain.
Yeah. So let me kind of before step one here. What we have is we've got a system that's been built on, just a massive quantity of psycholinguistics, psychological and linguistic and research with, again, huge number of research citations, and it's been used across so many different domains to try and understand the relationship between language and psychology and language and cognitive processes. And so when language is analyzed, we're using algorithms that capture these subtle signals based on how people use prepositions, articles, pronouns, different types of function words, and that those algorithms convert that into vectors with psychological metadata. And so basically we'll understand, as you can see on the left side of this chart, if you throw language into the system, say, a prompt history from an individual, and we'll use that as the example here for a large language model. If I were to take, Scott, your prompt history from a large language model, feed it through our system, you'd get back about 200 different dimensions of that reflect different aspects of your psychology, cognitive processing, and whatnot. And so this is just one example here. We've taken 4 of the more dominant traits from an individual whose historical language was analyzed, and what we found was most dominant here is low agreeableness, high impulsiveness, high neuroticism, and this kind of low analytical thinking style. And so if you feed those into a large language model, there's kind of 2 ways you can do it. You could feed it into a large language model, inject it as part of a prompt and say, when you respond to this individual based on their history, they are low on agreeableness, high on impulsiveness, high on neuroticism, and a low analytical thinker. Tailor your response to those traits, those features. And the large language model will do a relatively good job at it. But you can actually improve it even more if you say to the large language model first, based on these 4 attributes, agreeableness, impulsiveness, neuroticism, and analytical thinking, how would you refine a response so that it would be best received by that individual? And so you take then the instructions it generates and feed those into the prompt, and it responds in a way that reflects the way that person thinks and feels.
Right.
If you can go back. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you provided a good example of that here.
Yeah.
The left and right. So
exactly. Yeah. So if you take this exact example here, the generic agent behavior on the left is just this kind of generic response, right? There's not much to it. It's just kind of rote. Here are the instructions I was told to follow, and here's what we got. But if you're somebody who's if you're anxious and neurotic, this response may not necessarily sit with you just right at the end of the day. If you're impulsive and in a hurry, this response may not necessarily jive with you very well. So you take a look at what happens on the right. You inject those 4 recommendations into the either these 4 psychological vectors, or 4 psychological signals, or the 4 communication recommendations, and you get a response back that better jives with the person that you saw on the previous slide, right? You've got the large language model right out of the gate saying, no problem, I can help you reset the password right now. So that calms the person down a little bit, right? This is somebody who is showing some signs of neuroticism. Also addressing them and saying, we're going to get this sorted quickly. I need to confirm a few details to protect your account. And why it said protect your account as opposed to just I need to confirm a few details is because it's calming this person down a little bit and saying, I'm asking you information for your own security, right? And so on and so forth, right? And at the end, it also says just a couple of quick steps. You won't, we're not going to keep you waiting, and I'll stay with you the whole way. So this is somebody who's, again, somebody who's a little bit, neurotic, and somebody who's low in analytical thinking, and it's really kind of walking them through the process with kid gloves on.
Yeah, you can clearly see the difference. Well, I need to verify your identity versus, I just want to help you make sure that you're protected.
Yeah,
there's a different tone, and this is executing a task, which is resetting your password. But again, when you get into this, you're trying to work with these things to plan and make decisions. I can see where this becomes really.
But like that password reset example is an interesting one, because when you do that, you're in a different psychological state than you probably were 5 minutes before when you didn't need to reset your password. Suddenly, especially in this day and age where cybersecurity and people are worried about getting hacked, right? As soon as I engage with something about resetting a password, I'm kind of on the defensive, and I'm kind of, worried a little bit and looking out for my best interests, and a little concerned. Is this a legitimate activity? If I've been thrown into some sort of workflow by some sort of nefarious actor, and am I giving up compromise? Am I potentially compromising my security by giving them too much information? So having a response that really does address me as the person I am and acknowledges, where I'm at, can be immensely helpful at the end of the day in building the trust you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So when you guys Receptiviti, so you mentioned since 2015 or so, you guys have been doing this. Now we're in this world of AI, and so how are you expanding what you're doing? Is it basically you're creating the APIs that an agent or can interact with an LLM and your system and bring it all together? Is that sort of how it works?
So, it's interesting. I'll go a little beyond the question you're asking. When we started this, we actually launched an API that was doing personality insights slightly before IBM Watson launched theirs. We've always been a little bit ahead, and that wasn't by purpose. It was just by happenstance at the end of the day. The launch and kind of the proliferation of large language models has been really, really interesting for us, right? Because when large language models emerged, we looked at them with a little bit of trepidation, saying, ooh, these are really interesting. How quickly are they going to be able to do what we do? And what we found is that they can't do what we do. Mm-hmm. And so large language models haven't changed our business dramatically, because at the end of the day, we're in the business of helping organizations better understand the people that are important to them. And so, these agentic AI companies, these large language model companies, and the companies that are building off of large language models, they have the same problem, the same concern that our much earlier customers had at the end of the day, which is, who are these people we're interacting with? And the beautiful thing is that large language model companies and all of this technology we're talking about today, it's all centered around language. So, we've got so much of the raw data at our disposal that we can convert into signal. It hasn't changed our business. It's just broadened the applications for our business. I think the other way that it's changing things too is, a lot of the analysis that our customers used to do was less time sensitive at the end of the day. Help me analyze this audience so that I can better understand who they are, so I can go and cluster this audience and put out marketing messages that are going to resonate with them at a psychological level, right? Great example of the sort of work that we've done. What's different today is kind of the speed at which these sort of insights are going to be required, because you're dealing with real-time systems with large language models. So those present really interesting opportunities to build, a persona of who somebody is, and then continuously update it based on the language that they're generating. So now I understand, this is what Scott is typically like. And in this conversation, Scott is, a little happier, or a little less stressed, and I can treat him differently based on that. So it's the dynamic nature that's changed, the immediacy of the sort of, the immediacy of the need at the end of the day, and feeding these into live systems is become much easier. So at the end of the day, we're not changing the foundation of our business in any way. It's really about, how this is applied and where it's applied.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I think we're more relevant today than we've ever been.
Yeah, no, again, I think as you go, if I step back and just think about, this is podcast number 17 that I've done. So I've talked to a whole bunch of, pioneers like yourself. And if I bring us all together, is we're moving from a world of generative AI, what we would call assistance, right? AI assistance is what we call it here at the Cube Research, which are task oriented. They can help automate repetitive tasks, simple tasks. You can, create documents and content. You can analyze information. It's like, search on steroids, all that kind of stuff, right? Agents are more about helping you accomplish a goal, decisions, problem solve. They become more sophisticated, and you're starting to make real business decisions, and that trust factor goes up. And what I've sort of pulled together, and let me just show you a chart on this to get your feedback on it, is it's clear to me that LLMs are the foundation, but for agentic AI to realize its promise, particularly as we move forward in time from here, there's going to be the need for these extended models, if you will, that plug into and build around the LLM. So, and they're all based in mathematical or science, right? Like semantic knowledge. I mean, they're knowledge graphs, right? I can talk to the causal reasoning, which is the do calc that Judea Purl, talked about the dynamic nature of cause and effect. Swarm intelligence has its own mathematical I can't even say it. There's math behind all that and algorithms. And I think what you're saying is there's also science and math behind the psychological intelligence, and they can all be built into these extended models and APIs that then could be all integrated together. And the whole damn system learns from each other throughout all these facets. And so this is sort of like a ladder of new capabilities that are very likely to come on the scene in the context of agents as we go forward. So what do you think about this chart?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think Jan I'm going to butcher his name. Jan LeCun at the end of the day has talked about this idea that artificial intelligence needs world models at the end of the day. And I think this aligns quite well, and what you were showing just now aligns really, really well with that. At the end of the day, we have built these systems that are intended to serve humanity. They're intended to work with us. They're intended, as you said, they're assistants at the end of the day. And assistants can only be so good if they don't really understand who they're servicing, who they're serving. And so for these systems truly to become partners, they need to have, they need maybe not true empathy, but they need to interact with us in ways that feel more empathetic, that go beyond, just the simple kind of transactional interactions to ones that feel more human at the end of the day. We tend to not think about the social aspect of this, right? Talking to other humans is a social activity, but we're quickly kind of stepping into an age here where interacting with technology is becoming a social kind of experience. And we're beginning to expect the same sort of experience from technology as we expect to get from other people. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think, we're certainly going to be, seeing that psychological intelligence becomes one of these foundational components of these systems. They may not be psychologically intelligent the same way we are, but they'll be able to pick up on some of those signals and change their behavior, change what they do in ways that reflect what they can learn about people.
Yeah. I do think the next frontier is going to be the semantic knowledge. It's, meaning, context, and relationships among different things. Then you get into the psychological stuff that you talked about on this podcast. And you get into, the ability to make decisions, understand consequences, and do what ifs around the causal AI stuff. And then you get multiple agents and models working together and learning from each other to make even better decisions. And it's just, the technology, that's the next frontier of AI. I think. All right. Well, Jonathan, I think it's time for us to wrap up. This has been truly fascinating. It's an eye-opening conversation. We could probably talk all day on this stuff, and we'll definitely have you back sometime in the future and talk even more about this. So thanks for being here.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Scott.
I think the idea of the psychologically aware agents is definitely going to reshape, how AI collaborates with humans. I mean, it's a really powerful notion. And as we've been saying, the foundation for advancing the next wave of digital labor. So I think this is absolutely fundamental. So I thank you all for taking the time to tune in and watch. I hope this discussion has sparked some new ideas. To learn more about all of this, check out Receptiviti. They have a bunch of research and tools on their website, including, like healthcare workers and well-being index and things of that nature. So receptiviti.com. You can also contact Jonathan or I. I can help make the contacts into him if you would like to engage there. And don't forget, you can stream all the episodes of The Next Frontier of AI on demand from our YouTube channel, and on thecube.net. We'll see you next time on the next Frontiers of AI. We are the leader in enterprise tech news and analysis. See you all, and thanks again for being here.